The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Academy's imposing brick facade as James Thompson adjusted his daughter's backpack straps one final time. Olivia, 13 and full of nervous energy, stood before the school's grand entrance, her dark curls neatly braided and her new uniform precisely pressed. This was supposed to be their moment of triumph, admission to one of the most prestigious private schools in the district, earned through years of academic excellence and James's tireless work as a mechanical engineer. "You've got this, sweetheart," James said, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "Remember what we always say?" "Thompsons never back down," Olivia whispered, managing a small smile. Since losing her mother to cancer 3 years ago, these little moments with her father had become their anchor, their way of staying strong together. The hallways of Riverside Academy gleamed with polished marble and tradition, but Olivia quickly learned that beneath the glossy surface lay a complex social hierarchy. During her first class, Advanced Mathematics, she felt the weight of curious stares. She was one of only 4 students of color in a sea of faces, and the only one in her grade. Rebecca Mitchell, whose father served on the school board, made her presence known immediately. Tall, blonde, and dressed in a designer version of the school uniform, she commanded attention with practiced ease. When Olivia answered a complex algebra question correctly, Rebecca's perfectly glossed lips curved into a smirk. "Well, well," Rebecca whispered to her friends, loud enough for Olivia to hear. "Looks like someone's trying too hard to prove they belong here." The words stung, but Olivia kept her eyes forward, remembering her father's advice about focusing on her goals. During lunch, she found an empty table near the window, carefully unpacking the lunch James had prepared that morning. She was halfway through her sandwich when Rebecca and her friends chose to sit at the adjacent table. "Did you see her uniform?" one of Rebecca's friends stage whispered. "Definitely second-hand. What else would you expect?" Rebecca replied, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard her father barely scraped together the tuition. They probably can't afford much else." Olivia's chest tightened, but she continued eating, pretending not to hear. Her uniform was new, James had insisted on it, wanting her to start fresh. They'd budgeted carefully for months to afford it, along with her books and supplies. Throughout the day, similar incidents accumulated like paper cuts, small but increasingly painful. Rebecca and her friends would bump into her in the hallways, knock her books off her desk, accidentally, and make loud comments about her hair and appearance. When James picked her up that afternoon, he noticed something was off in her usual bright demeanor. "How was your first day, Liv?" "Fine," she replied, forcing a smile. "The classes are interesting." She didn't mention Rebecca or the comments. Her father had worked so hard to give her this opportunity, she didn't want to worry him. That evening, as Olivia sat at their kitchen table doing homework, James watched her with concern. She was quieter than usual, her shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. He placed a mug of hot chocolate beside her, their special tradition since she was little. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" he said, sitting across from her. Olivia nodded, warming her hands around the mug. "I know, Dad. I'm just adjusting. It's different from my old school." James studied her face, noting the slight tremor in her voice. He'd raised her alone for 3 years now, and he knew when she was holding something back. But he also knew his daughter's strength, inherited from her mother, and her determination to handle things on her own. "Whatever comes up," he said carefully, "remember that we're a team. Always have been, always will be." Olivia's eyes welled up slightly, but she blinked back the tears. "I remember, Dad." As she went to bed that night, Olivia tried to convince herself that things would get better. She just needed to work harder, be smarter, prove that she deserved her place at Riverside Academy. But in the darkness of her room, Rebecca's words echoed in her mind, and she wondered if any amount of effort would ever be enough to make them accept her. As weeks passed at Riverside Academy, Olivia's initial optimism faded like autumn leaves. Rebecca Mitchell had transformed from an unpleasant classmate into a constant shadow over Olivia's school life. The bullying grew more sophisticated, carefully calculated to stay just below the radar of distracted teachers and administrators. During chemistry class, Rebecca accidentally knocked over a beaker of water onto Olivia's lab notebook, destroying weeks of careful notes. In the library, Olivia would find her reserved study spot occupied by Rebecca's friends, who would whisper and giggle whenever she walked past. Her locker began accumulating mysterious scratches, and her textbooks would disappear only to reappear hours later in different parts of the school. James noticed subtle changes in his daughter. The bright-eyed girl who once chattered excitedly about science projects now picked at her dinner in silence. Her weekend requests to visit the museum or planetarium, their special father-daughter tradition, became less frequent. She spent more time in her room, claiming she needed to study harder to keep up. One evening, while doing laundry, James found a crumpled uniform blouse hidden at the bottom of the hamper. Dark ink stains spread across the back, too precise to be accidental. When he asked Olivia about it, she mumbled something about spilling her pen and quickly changed the subject. "Your grades in English dropped last week," James mentioned carefully over breakfast, watching his daughter's reaction. "Is everything okay with Mrs. Porter's class?" Olivia stared into her cereal bowl. "Rebecca sits behind me now. She just makes it hard to concentrate sometimes." "Have you talked to Mrs. Porter about changing seats?" "No." Olivia's response came too quickly, too forcefully. "Please don't say anything, Dad. It'll only make things worse." James felt helpless watching his daughter shrink into herself. He remembered how her mother would have handled this, with quiet strength and wisdom. But Catherine wasn't here, and he had to figure this out on his own. The situation reached a new level when Olivia's prized science fair project, months of research on sustainable energy, vanished the day before presentations. She found it later in a bathroom trash can, water-damaged and torn. Rebecca's signature pink pen marks were clearly visible on the ruined display board. That night, James heard muffled sobs coming from Olivia's room. He found her curled up on her bed, clutching the photo of her mother that always sat on her nightstand. "I tried so hard, Dad," she whispered as he sat beside her. "I did everything right. My grades are good, I follow all the rules, I never talk back. Why do they hate me so much?" James pulled her close, his heart breaking. "This isn't about you, sweetheart. You haven't done anything wrong. Rebecca says I don't belong there. That people like us are only there because of scholarships and diversity quotas." Olivia's voice cracked. "Maybe she's right. Maybe we should have stayed at my old school." "Listen to me," James said firmly, turning her to face him. "Your mother and I taught you that your worth isn't determined by what others think. You earned your place at that school through hard work and talent. No one can take that away from you." But as he held his crying daughter, James knew that principles alone wouldn't solve this. The next morning, he noticed Olivia's hands trembling as she packed her bag for school. She checked her phone constantly, her face tightening each time it buzzed with new messages. During lunch break, Olivia found herself cornered in the empty art room. Rebecca and two of her friends surrounded her, their designer shoes clicking on the tile floor. "We saw you crying to your daddy last night," Rebecca taunted, holding up her phone to show a photo taken through Olivia's bedroom window. "So pathetic. Bet you wish your mommy was here to protect you too." The mention of her mother hit Olivia like a physical blow. She felt her chest constrict, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. As she pushed past them and ran into the hallway, their laughter echoed behind her, a sound that would haunt her dreams that night. What Olivia didn't know was that James had already begun documenting everything: the damaged clothes, the declining grades, the mysterious bruises she tried to hide. He photographed every piece of evidence, noting dates and times in a detailed log. His daughter might have inherited her mother's strength, but she had also inherited his methodical mind. And James Thompson was building a case. James Thompson hadn't planned on visiting Riverside Academy that Wednesday afternoon. A water main break at his engineering firm had sent everyone home early, and something in his gut told him to check on Olivia. As he pulled into the school parking lot, he noticed groups of students heading to the athletic fields for afternoon activities. He spotted Olivia near the outdoor lunch tables, alone as usual. But before he could call out to her, he saw Rebecca Mitchell and 5 other students approach his daughter. Even from a distance, their body language set off every parental alarm bell he possessed. "Still here, charity case?" Rebecca's voice carried across the courtyard. "Didn't get the message yet?" James watched in horror as one of Rebecca's friends knocked Olivia's backpack off the table, spilling its contents across the ground. Another grabbed her phone as she reached for it, tossing it between them like a game. "Give it back," Olivia pleaded, her voice trembling but determined. "That was my mom's." "Oh, you mean this?" Rebecca held up a phone case with a photo tucked inside, the last picture taken of Olivia and Catherine before the cancer took her. "Oops." She deliberately dropped it, letting it crack against the concrete. Something in James snapped. He was already striding across the courtyard when he saw Rebecca shove his daughter hard enough to make her stumble backward. Olivia hit the ground, and the group of students laughed. "Hey!" James's voice boomed across the space. The bullies scattered like startled deer, but not before he got a clear view of each face. Rebecca, however, stood her ground, a smirk playing at her lips. "Daddy to the rescue," she sneered, but James ignored her completely, focusing on Olivia. "Are you hurt?" he asked, helping her up. She shook her head, but he could see her hands trembling as she tried to gather her scattered belongings. "Mr. Thompson?" A teacher finally appeared, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Parents aren't allowed on campus without checking in at the office." "Really?" James turned, his voice deadly calm. "That's what concerns you right now? Not the fact that I just witnessed 6 students assaulting my daughter?" "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding," the teacher replied dismissively. "Children will be children." James pulled out his phone, showing the video he'd started recording the moment he spotted trouble. "Does this look like a misunderstanding to you?" The teacher's expression changed. "Perhaps we should discuss this in the principal's office." Principal Harrison's office was designed to intimidate: dark wood paneling, imposing desk, walls lined with awards and achievements. But James wasn't intimidated. He sat straight-backed in the visitor's chair, Olivia beside him, as he played the video for the 3rd time. "While this behavior is concerning," Principal Harrison began, folding his hands on the desk, "Miss Mitchell is a model student from a respected family. I'm sure she didn't mean any real harm." "Real harm?" James's voice was quiet but sharp. "My daughter has endured months of targeted harassment. Her property has been destroyed, her grades have suffered, and now she's being physically assaulted. And you're telling me there's no real harm?" "Mr. Thompson, you have to understand our position." "No, you need to understand mine," James interrupted. "I've documented everything: the damaged clothes, the threatening messages, the vandalized schoolwork. I have dates, times, photographs. I've been building this case for weeks, hoping the school would step up and do the right thing. But now I see that was naive." He pulled out his phone again, but this time he wasn't showing a video. He dialed 911. "What are you doing?" Principal Harrison stood up, alarmed. "Reporting an assault," James replied calmly. "Since the school won't protect my daughter, I'm involving people who will." As he spoke to the dispatcher, he watched Principal Harrison's face shift from dismissal to concern to barely concealed panic. Olivia gripped his free hand, and he squeezed back, letting her know he was there. "The police are on their way," James announced after hanging up. I suggest you use this time to gather security footage from today's incident. And while you're at it, pull the records for every complaint that's been filed about Rebecca Mitchell and her friends. I'm sure my daughter isn't their only victim." Principal Harrison sputtered about reputation and proper channels, but James had stopped listening. He turned to Olivia, who was looking at him with a mixture of fear and relief. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I should have told you sooner." "No, sweetheart. I'm sorry I didn't see it earlier." He hugged her close. "But it stops today. We're going to fight this the right way." As they waited for the police to arrive, James thought about Catherine. She had always taught Olivia to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Looking at his daughter now, he saw that same quiet strength emerging from beneath the fear. The arrival of 2 police cruisers at Riverside Academy sent ripples through the carefully maintained facade of perfection. Officer Rachel Martinez took one look at the cracked phone case containing Catherine's photo and knew this wasn't just typical teenage drama. "We take these incidents very seriously," she assured James and Olivia, while her partner interviewed Rebecca Mitchell in another room. "Especially given the evidence of premeditation and sustained harassment." As word spread about the police presence, something unexpected happened. Other students began coming forward. First was Daniel Park, a sophomore who had endured similar treatment from Rebecca's group the previous year. Then came Emma Rodriguez, whose art project had mysteriously disappeared after she won the spot Rebecca wanted in a prestigious exhibition. The school's security footage revealed more than Principal Harrison had bargained for. Camera feeds showed systematic harassment, Rebecca and her friends blocking Olivia's path to classes, damaging her belongings, and coordinating their actions through text messages. The photo taken through Olivia's bedroom window proved particularly disturbing to the investigators. "That crosses into criminal stalking territory," Officer Martinez explained, reviewing James's meticulously kept documentation. "Combined with the physical assault and property damage, we're looking at serious charges." The Mitchells' response was swift and predictable. Rebecca's father, Richard Mitchell, stormed into the school the next morning, threatening lawsuits and board action. But he found the landscape had shifted beneath his feet. "Mr. Mitchell," James said calmly when they crossed paths in the administrative office, "I have one question for you. If someone had done to your daughter what your daughter did to mine, what would you have done?" The question seemed to catch Richard off guard. For a moment, his carefully constructed anger faltered. News of the incident spread through parent circles like wildfire. To everyone's surprise, support for the Thompsons began pouring in. Parents whose children had suffered in silence started speaking up. The mother of a former student who had transferred due to bullying reached out with her own documentation. At home, Olivia watched these developments with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "What's going to happen now?" she asked James over dinner, pushing her pasta around her plate. "Now we make sure this never happens to anyone else," he replied. "Remember what Mom always said about standing up for what's right?" Olivia nodded, managing a small smile. "That one person speaking up gives others courage to do the same." The school board called an emergency meeting. The usually quiet monthly gathering became standing room only as parents, students, and teachers packed in to have their voices heard. James presented his evidence methodically, like the engineer he was, building an irrefutable case of systematic bullying and administrative negligence. Daniel Park's mother, a civil rights attorney, stood up to speak. "This isn't just about bullying," she declared. "This is about institutional bias and the willful ignorance of those in power. How many students have to suffer before we acknowledge the problem?" Emma Rodriguez's father, typically quiet at these meetings, found his voice. "My daughter was told to keep her head down when she reported harassment. She was told not to make waves. No child should have to choose between their education and their dignity." The testimony that hit hardest came from an unexpected source. Ms. Bennett, a junior class teacher, stepped forward despite obvious nervousness. "I witnessed incidents but was discouraged from reporting them. We were told certain families were too important to confront. I can't stay silent anymore." Throughout the meeting, Olivia sat beside her father, drawing strength from his presence. She noticed Rebecca's conspicuous absence, though Richard Mitchell sat rigid in the front row, his expression darkening with each new revelation. As the evidence mounted, the board members' practiced indifference crumbled. Parents demanded action, not just vague promises of looking into the matter. The community that had once turned a blind eye was finally opening its eyes. Officer Martinez attended the meeting as well, providing updates on the criminal investigation. "This case has revealed a pattern of behavior that goes beyond school discipline," she explained. "We're treating this with the seriousness it deserves." For James, watching his daughter find her voice again was worth every moment of the fight. When Olivia raised her hand to speak at the meeting, he felt Catherine's presence more strongly than ever. "I stayed quiet because I thought I was alone," Olivia said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But I'm not alone. None of us are. And we shouldn't have to be silent to feel safe at school." Her words hung in the air, a truth too powerful to ignore. The board chair cleared his throat, visibly moved. "We've failed our students," he admitted. "But that failure ends tonight." The changes at Riverside Academy didn't happen overnight, but they were profound. In the weeks following the board meeting, a series of decisive actions transformed the school's culture. Rebecca Mitchell and her closest accomplices faced serious consequences: suspension, mandatory counseling, and community service. More significantly, Richard Mitchell resigned from the school board, his influence finally curtailed by the weight of evidence and public pressure. Principal Harrison, facing mounting criticism over his handling of bullying complaints, announced his early retirement. His replacement, Dr. Janelle Washington, arrived with a reputation for zero tolerance toward harassment and a commitment to fostering an inclusive environment. "Real change requires more than just punishing bad behavior," Dr. Washington explained during her first assembly. "It requires creating a community where every student feels safe, valued, and heard." The school implemented new anti-bullying protocols, with clear reporting procedures and consequences. Security cameras were upgraded, and teachers received additional training in recognizing and addressing harassment. But perhaps most importantly, student voices were finally being heard. Olivia found herself at the center of an unexpected movement. Students who had previously kept their distance now approached her with their stories, seeking advice and support. With encouragement from Ms. Bennett, she helped establish a peer support group called Stronger Together, providing a safe space for students to share their experiences and find solidarity. James watched his daughter's transformation with pride and amazement. The quiet girl who had once hidden her pain was emerging as a leader, turning her trauma into a force for positive change. During one of their weekend museum visits, a tradition they'd happily resumed, he found himself fighting back tears as Olivia confidently explained physics concepts to younger students in a workshop she'd helped organize. "Mom would be so proud of you," he said as they walked through the planetarium exhibit, their special place where the stars always reminded them of Catherine. "She would be proud of us both," Olivia replied, squeezing his hand. "You taught me what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Officer Martinez's investigation concluded with Rebecca and 2 other students accepting responsibility through a juvenile justice program focused on rehabilitation. The program required them to study the impacts of bullying and make amends to those they'd harmed. When Rebecca finally approached Olivia to apologize, it wasn't the theatrical production everyone expected. Instead, it was a quiet moment in the school library, away from prying eyes. "I never thought about how it felt for you," Rebecca admitted, her usual confidence replaced by genuine remorse. "I was so caught up in proving I was better than everyone else, I became someone I'm not proud of." Olivia listened, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology immediately. "Understanding why you did it doesn't make it okay," she said finally. But recognizing it is a start. The most profound changes were often the smallest ones. Students from different social circles began sitting together at lunch. The competitive atmosphere that had bred hostility gave way to collaboration. When a new student arrived mid-semester, Olivia was the first to welcome her, remembering all too well how it felt to be the outsider. During the Spring Arts Festival, Emma Rodriguez unveiled a powerful installation piece about bullying and resilience. Daniel Park composed a song about finding your voice. And Olivia, inspired by her mother's memory, presented a science project on using technology to create support networks for isolated students. James attended every event, every presentation, his heart full. One evening, as they sat in their backyard looking at the stars, another tradition they'd reclaimed, Olivia turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, do you think things really change, or do people just get better at hiding who they are?" James considered the question carefully. "I think when enough people choose to be brave, to stand up for what's right, real change is possible. It's not easy, and it's not perfect, but it's worth fighting for." Olivia nodded, looking up at the constellation she and her mother used to trace together. "You know what I learned from all this? Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do even when you are afraid." As if in response, a shooting star streaked across the sky. James remembered how Catherine used to say that stars were witnesses to our best and worst moments, silent guardians watching over those who dared to shine. The following week, Riverside Academy unveiled a new mural in the main hallway, designed by students and faculty together. At its center was a simple but powerful message: "In this place, we rise by lifting others." Looking at her father's reflection beside hers in the mural's glossy surface, Olivia smiled. They had turned a painful chapter into a story of hope, not just for themselves, but for everyone who would follow. The wounds would always be there, but they had healed into something stronger, like stars emerging after the darkest night.